Hi class, welcome to part 2 of our Organizing Data and Frequency Distribution workshop. Find your grouped frequency distribution worksheet within your workbook. And you can see over here in column A, we have scores from a 4x10 yard shuttle run test from a group of middle school students. These scores are measured in seconds to the nearest tenth of a second, as outlined in this problem statement here. And we're going to build on some of the skills that we've already learned, looking at the highest score, so the maximum value, the minimum value, calculating the range. And then we're also going to talk about bins. So essentially groups that are going to be on your x-axis. And we're going to learn the frequency function in Excel today. We'll also touch on normal curve. And then you're also going to create a cumulative frequency graph based on this data. But first of all, we have to set up our spreadsheet. But before we do that, I just kind of want you to see what we're going for here. This is a histogram, also known as your frequency distribution. And you can see down here I have different groups. So scores that were from, say, 15 to 16 seconds, from 14 to 15 seconds, and so on. And these are the observations that fell within these time ranges. Okay, and you can see that my interval size is essentially 1 second. So I have 7 groups here. Typically, if you have lots of data and lots of different data values, you might want to have a larger range of groups, but probably not over 20. So 10 to 20 seems to be kind of that's the sweet spot. Too many groups and your graph becomes very cluttered, and too few and your columns become quite large and you don't necessarily see the variation in your data that you'd like to see. So for this particular set of data, it seems really appropriate to just separate them in 1 second intervals and create just 7 groups. And you can see it looks quite nice. It has a nice normal curve or normal distribution. All right, so let's take a look, or let's figure out how to do this. So first of all, I'm just going to let you fill in these things that you know how to fill in, right? So we know how to do the count. Let me get rid of my cursor. So we want to find out how many observations we have. So 72. Okay, so I'll let you just do this. And so for the interval, like I said, we're separating it by 1 second. But the way we would usually calculate the interval is to take the range divided by the number of groups we want to see on our x-axis. And so that's really an arbitrary number. Remember I said that 10 to 20 is usually a kind of that sweet spot. But it is actually really up to you as the investigator. But just for demonstration purposes, let's go ahead and do it the right way. So I've selected my range, divide using the slash key here, and 7. Okay. And you can see I came up with a value of 1. Now you might have come up with something that has a few more digits behind it, something that may look like that, right? So I just wanted to round it up. And so over here in my toolbar, under my number toolbar, Excel will just round it up to a nice whole number. Okay. So, is that it? So bins. So the bins for our graph, let's go ahead and do that first. I'm just going to get rid of this column, so select it. Not sure why I have that there. I'm sure I'm going to need it again because I'll figure it out in a second. Okay, so the bins for graph are essentially the 15 to 16, 14 to 15, etc. that we have under our x-axis. And Excel, that's not really a mathematical operation to Excel. So it's just more for I guess just for graphing purposes, right? It's more decorative, and we'll talk about that in a second. But so let's just go ahead and create those basically our x-axis, I'm sorry. Okay, so and then I'm just hitting enter, and it'll move down to the next cell. And we don't really need to go below 9 because you can see that our fastest runner, our fastest times was 9.1. So those are the bins for our graph. Now, Excel really doesn't care about, say, this 15 to 16. It just wants the highest value for each group. It'll figure the rest out for you. So let's go ahead and just start with 16, representing this bin here, and then the next bin would be 15 here, and then the next bin 14, 13, 12, etc. But we can take this down, of course, and we don't have to go below 9. And actually, we don't really even have to put the 9 in there because anything under 10 is going to go into this bin here. So we don't even need that. Okay. So now the frequency function. Starting from the beginning. All right. All right, so here's the formula for frequency, and I'm very sorry that this is not very large for those of you who are trying to follow along. Okay. Equals. So equals frequency. So you can see I've used this recently. And then it gives us a help bar here. So frequency, parenthesis, data array, and bins array. So our data array is essentially column A. So this is our times in seconds. So we could highlight the whole thing, which is quite easy. What we can't really do is we can't just highlight the column. For some reason, this formula doesn't necessarily work that way, but I can show you a little trick that might make things faster. So if we highlight our first data point, and then we use our scroll down bar, and before you highlight the second, go ahead and hit the shift key, hold shift down, and then click your last, and you can see it highlights that whole column for you. Okay, and so now we know that our frequency is referencing cell A2, begins with cell A2 here, all the way down to A73. Okay, so that is our data array. Now our bins array, we're going to come back up here to our formula bar, hit a comma, and our bins array is just these guys right here. That's 16 through 10. Okay, so there's your formula for frequency, but it's not quite done yet, and I'll show you why. So go ahead and hit enter. And what this is telling us is that 3 individuals scored between a 15 and 16. So if we go ahead and just take this down, I just double clicked and it went all the way down. You can see, okay, well, it's saying that between 14 and 15 there were 5 observations. But let's go ahead and total this column up, because what we know if we want to do a check is that these should equal 72. So go ahead and do a sum. So equals sum, that's going to add up all of these data points here. Hit enter, and we're missing 2. And the reason why is because Excel is going to reference this column. I'm sorry. Excel is going to look for this bin here, and it's going to take this and it's going to sort through this entire set of data and say, okay, the data points that fit between 15 and 16, they're going to go here. But what's happening is that if you look at my frequency, this formula is correct. But as I progress down, Excel progresses its formula down with me. And we don't want it to do that. We don't want it to skip anything. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add dollar signs, and the dollar signs are essentially telling Excel, no, every single time you're looking for a bin, we want you to sort through this data. So we're going to add a dollar sign in front of both the letter and the number of the cell. So in our A, in front of A, in front of 73, and then after it makes its rounds through, say, bin 16, it's okay that it goes down to 15 and then 14 and 13, just as long as it sorts through all of this as it's going through. But we could actually have a stopping point. So we don't necessarily want it to keep going back after it's already sort of established which data points fit into these bins. But we do want it to stop at a certain place. And so we're going to put dollar signs in front of this cell here. So this G8. Oops. Okay, sorry, I have to undo that. Actually, yeah, it won't let me do that. Okay. All right, so hopefully you guys didn't touch anything. And your formula looks really nice. I'm just redoing this, so I'm putting dollar signs, letter, number, and then in front of this G. Okay, and then hit enter. And hopefully what we see is that we got those two observations back, and we did. So there's our 72. Okay, so that's a way to check to make sure that everything looks okay with your data. All right. Okay. So now let's go ahead and while we're at it, let's just do a cumulative frequency. So go ahead and add a column. I think I just figured out where that column was supposed to go to. We're okay. Okay. So remember how to calculate the cumulative frequency. So and then our formula is this plus this, right? So 3 and 5 is 8, and then 8 and 10 will be 18. And if we just highlight, drop down, we can see it ends on our last observation, our participant, which is 72. So let's go ahead and title this. All right, so in case you missed that, I'm sorry, in case you missed that. So a couple different ways that you can expand the column to make it so that you can see your whole header. So we can put this, our cursor right here, we have this dual arrow, and if you double click on that line, it'll spread it out for you. Okay, but sometimes that doesn't look as nice. So we can come up to wrap text, make sure the cell is highlighted. You come down to this wrap text, and then we can actually make them look even prettier and center everything. Or, let's see. Okay. Right. All right, so let's go ahead and make our chart now. So go ahead and highlight any cell, it doesn't matter, and then go to Insert up here in your menu, Chart. Okay, it's going to give you a few options. We're going to do a histogram, so we're going to do a column chart. So go ahead and select column, and from the drop-down menu, just clustered column is great. And you have a blank slate here. And I'm going to try to move this around a little bit so I have access to my data. Okay. We'll see. Okay. So now I'm going to right-click anywhere within the chart area and select data. So the first thing we want to do is add a series. it doesn't matter, you don't necessarily need to name it, but we can. We'll just name it frequency. And then let's go ahead and select our X labels. Our X-axis labels are the ones that we created specifically for this purpose, right? The 15 to 16 all the way down to 9 to 10. Go ahead and select, hit enter. And then our Y values are frequency. Hit enter. Okay, and then OK. And so now here we have our awesome frequency distribution. And there's a few things that we need to do to clean this up. So the first thing, let's go ahead and get rid of the title and get rid of that little label because we don't necessarily need it. And let's make sure we label our X and Y axes. So I'm going to go up to chart layout. Your computer might be a little different, but chances are it should be pretty at least obvious in your toolbar. You might have something, add axis label. Actually, I think some of you PC users might have add axis element or something like that, but we're going to add our axis title. So below axis, so our horizontal axis, this is time in seconds. And so always make sure to put your units, what you're measuring, so time in seconds, height in meters, weight in kilograms, etc. Okay, and let's add another one. Let's go ahead and add one here. And we're just going to call that frequency. I'm using the rotated title. So you can type in to this little box. So you can come up here to the formula bar. Okay. All right, so then we have our frequency and our time in seconds, and then all of the observations that fell between, say, 15 to 16 seconds, 14 to 15 seconds, etc. And this looks pretty nice. It follows a nice normal distribution. Our graph looks good. There's not a lot of white space. So yes, and I'll let you can definitely fiddle with this. I think, changing the color, etc. Okay. All right, so for your assignment, you'll cut or copy and paste this into a Word document that has, your name, the assignment name, the date, just like outlined in the syllabus. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, so now the last thing on your list, if you look at your list of instructions here, or objectives, is to create a cumulative frequency graph. Okay, so we talked a little bit about cumulative frequency last time, but essentially what the cumulative frequency column tells us is the status of each subject compared to the total group. So we're going to use a different graph for our cumulative frequency graph. So let's go ahead and insert a chart. And we're going to use an XY scatter. We're not going to necessarily use the dots. We want a line. So let's use a smooth marked scatter. And the reason is because we're going to select both the X and the Y axes. So a line graph typically, say you had a constant variable as your X, but say several groups, or maybe two different groups of Y. That's when you'd use a line graph, is if you have a constant variable. But a scatter plot is if you wanted to control both your X and your Y. So we're going to use a smooth marked scatter plot. Again, blank canvas. Right click on the chart, go ahead and select data. We need to add a series so it knows we're putting something on the graph. And then in the our ordered scores are actually going to go in. That's not good. Let me see. Okay, sorry. Just a second. There we go. Now I can see what I'm doing. Okay. Okay, so our ordered scores. So these are just the upper limits of our bin values. And then our Y values is the cumulative frequency. Okay. All right, and there we go. There's our cumulative frequency graph. Now that is fairly hideous, and so let's take care of that. And then if you look over here, we started with 0, but the lowest value we have is 9.1. So how about we get rid of, say, 0 to 8? So highlight the axis. You can click on any one of these variables here. It's 2, 4, 6. And then if you right click, you have a format axis option. And we're going to go to scale. So the minimum we're going to go to is let's do 8. 8's good. And then the maximum, let's go ahead and let's try 16. Let's see if we lose anything by doing that. Okay. No, that looks okay. Okay. So much better. Right? So now we can kind of see the status of all of the, you can kind of see, so if a student were to ask you, where did they fall, you could sort of show them, where they fell relative to the rest of their classmates. And so that's really what the cumulative frequency graph is telling us. I think I want to clean this up a little bit more. It's driving me nuts. Let's change it to 9, shall we? Let's. So you can see that this data point basically represents the participants that scored between 9 and 10 seconds and 10 to 11 seconds. And so this is sort of the top percentile, right? These are the faster runners up here and the slower runners down here. Okay, so that's your cumulative frequency. And of course, I want you to go ahead and label the X and the Y axes. You don't need a title. But what you might need is, say, a caption underneath describing what's happening here. So you have a problem statement. Right? So when you move this into a Word document, you'll just create a caption based on this problem statement here. All right, so hopefully, here is your assignment. And what I'd like you to do is, this is your raw data. You get to enter all of this data into these cells here. And then using your skills, determine the highest and lowest scores, calculate the range. How many observations do you have? So how many participants do you have in your study? And then I want you to establish groups and bins. And try to set the lower limit of the lowest group as a multiple of 0.5. That's as far as your interval range. Go ahead and create a histogram of the data. And then the last thing that I would like you to do is create a cumulative frequency distribution. Okay. So don't need a lot of words, just really good graphs. And as always, unless specified, please submit a hard copy of your work in using a Word document. And this assignment, it will actually be due on Wednesday, February 1st. All right, at the beginning of class. If you have any questions, please email me.